How do you do, Lady Windermere?
How do you do, Lord Darlington? No, I can't shake hands with you. My hands are wet with all these roses. Aren't they lovely? Do you know today's my birthday?
No, is it really?
Yes, I'm of age today. Quite an important day in my life, isn't it? That's why I'm giving this party tonight. Do sit down.
I wish I'd known it was your birthday, Lady Windermere. I would have covered the whole street in front of your house with flowers for you to walk on. They are made for you.
Lord Darlington, you annoyed me last night at the Foreign Office. I'm afraid you're going to annoy me again.
Well, I, Lady Windermere? I'm quite miserable, Lady Windermere. You must tell me what I did.
You kept paying me elaborate compliments the whole evening.
Ah. Nowadays, we are all of us so hard up that the only pleasant things to pay are compliments. They're the only things we can pay.
No, I'm talking very seriously. You mustn't laugh. I'm being quite serious. I don't like compliments. And I don't see why a man should think he is pleasing a woman enormously when he says to her a whole heap of things that he doesn't mean.
Ah, but I did mean them.
I should hope not. I like you very much, Lord Darlington. You know that. But I shouldn't like you at all if I thought you were what most other men are. Believe me, you are better than most other men. I sometimes think you pretend to be worse.
We all have our little vanities, Lady Windermere.
Why must you make that your special one?
If you pretend to be good, the world takes you very seriously. If you pretend to be bad, it doesn't. Such is the astounding stupidity of optimism.
Don't you want the world to take you seriously then, Lord Darlington?
Not the world. Who are the people the world takes seriously? All the dull people one can think of, from the bishops down to the bores. I should like you to take me very seriously, Lady Windermere, you more than anyone else in life.
Why? Why me?
Because I think we might be great friends. Let us be great friends. You may want a friend someday.
Why do you say that?
Oh, we all want friends at times.
I think we're very great friends already, Lord Darlington. And we shall always remain so, as long as you don't...
Don't what?
Don't spoil it by saying extravagant, silly things to me. You think I'm a Puritan, I suppose. Well, there is something of the Puritan in me. I was brought up like that. I am glad of it.
My dear Lady Windermere.
You think me behind the age. Well, I am. I should be very sorry to be on the same level as an age like this.
You think the age very bad?
Yes. Nowadays, people seem to look on life as a speculation. It is not a speculation, it is a sacrament. Its ideal is love. Its purification is sacrifice.
Oh, anything's better than being sacrificed.
Don't say that.
Do say it. I feel it. I know it. Do you think then, of course I'm only putting an imaginary instance, but do you think that in the case of a young married couple, say about 2 years married, that if the husband suddenly becomes the intimate friend of a woman of, well, more than doubtful character, he's always calling upon her, lunching with her, probably paying her bills, do you think that the wife should not console herself?
Console herself?
Yes, I think she should. I think she has the right.
So, because the husband is vile, the wife should be vile also?
Vileness is a terrible word, Lady Windermere.
It is a terrible thing, Lord Darlington.
And I must say, I think you're very hard on modern life, Lady Windermere. Do you think seriously that women who have committed what the world calls a fault should never be forgiven?
I think they should never be forgiven.
And men? Do you think that there should be the same laws for men as there are for women?
Certainly.
Well, I think life's too complex a thing to be said by these hard and fast rules.
If we had these hard and fast rules, we should find life much more simple.
You allow no exceptions.
None.
What a fascinating Puritan you are, Lady Windermere.
The adjective was unnecessary, Lord Darlington.
I couldn't help it. I can resist everything except temptation.
You have the modern affectation of weakness.
It's only an affectation, Lady Windermere.
Everyone's dying to know the brilliant Mrs. Cheveley. Our attachés at Vienna write to us about nothing else.
Thank you, Sir Robert. An acquaintance that begins with a compliment is sure to develop into a real friendship. It starts in the right manner. And I find that I know Lady Chiltern already.
Really?
Yes, she has just reminded me that we were at school together. I remember it perfectly now. She always got the Good Conduct Prize. I have a distinct recollection of Lady Chiltern always getting the Good Conduct Prize.
And what prizes did you get, Mrs. Cheveley?
Oh, my prizes came a little later on in life. I don't think any of them were for good conduct. I forget.
I'm sure they were for something charming.
I don't know that women are always rewarded for being charming. I think they are usually punished for it. Certainly more women grow old nowadays through the faithfulness of their admirers than through anything else. At least that is the only way I can account for the terribly haggard look of most of your pretty women in London.
What an appalling philosophy that sounds. To attempt to analyze you, Mrs. Cheveley, would be an impertinence. But may I ask, at heart, are you an optimist or a pessimist? Those seem to be the only two fashionable religions left to us nowadays.
Oh, I'm neither. Optimism begins in a broad grin, and pessimism ends in blue spectacles. Besides, both of them are merely poses.
You prefer to be natural.
Sometimes, but it is a very difficult pose to keep up.
What would our modern psychological novelists, of whom we hear so much, say to such a theory as that?
Ah, the strength of women comes from the fact that psychology cannot explain us. Men can be analysed, women merely adored.
You think science cannot grapple with the problem of women?
Science can never grapple with the irrational. That is why it has no future before it in this world.
And women represent the irrational.
Well-dressed women do.
Well, I fear I could hardly agree with you there, but you've not yet told me what makes you leave your brilliant Vienna for our gloomy London. Or perhaps the question is indiscreet.
Questions are never indiscreet. Answers sometimes are.
At any rate, may I know if it is politics or pleasure?
Politics are my only pleasure. Philanthropy seems to me to have become simply the refuge of people who wish to annoy their fellow creatures. I prefer politics. I think they are more becoming.
A political life is a noble career.
Sometimes, and sometimes it is a clever game, Sir Robert, and sometimes it is a great nuisance.
Which do you find it?
A combination of all three.
But you've not told me yet what makes you honour London so suddenly. Our season is almost over.
Oh, I don't care about the London season. It is too matrimonial. People are either hunting for husbands or hiding from them. I wanted to meet you. It is quite true. You know what a woman's curiosity is. Almost as great as a man's. I wanted immensely to meet you and to ask you to do something for me.
I hope it is not a little thing, Mrs. Cheveley. I find that little things are so very difficult to do.
No, I don't think it is quite a little thing.
I'm so glad. Do tell me what it is.
Later on. And now, may I have a tour of your beautiful house? I hear your pictures are quite charming. Poor Baron Arnheim. You remember the Baron used to tell me you had some wonderful Corot's.
Did you know Baron Arnheim well?
Intimately. Did you?
At one time.
Wonderful man, wasn't he?
He was very remarkable in many ways.
I always think it's such a pity he never wrote his memoirs. They would have been most interesting.
He knew men and cities well, like the old Greek.
Without the dreadful disadvantage of having a Penelope waiting at home for him.
You can take a seat, Mr. Worthing.
Thank you, Lady Bracknell. I prefer standing.
I feel bound to tell you that you are not on my list of eligible young men. However, I am quite ready to enter your name, should your answers be what a rarely affectionate mother requires. Do you smoke?
Well, yes, I must admit I smoke.
I am glad to hear it. A man should always have an occupation of some kind. There are far too many idle men in London as it is. I have always been of the opinion that a man who desires to get married should know either everything or nothing. Which do you know?
I know nothing, Lady Bracknell.
I am pleased to hear it. I do not approve of anything that tampers with natural ignorance. Ignorance is like a delicate, exotic fruit. Touch it, and the bloom is gone. The whole theory of modern education is radically unsound. Fortunately, in England, at any rate, education produces no effect whatsoever. What is your income?
Between 7,000 and 8,000 a year.
In land or in investments?
In investments, chiefly. I have a country house with some land, of course, attached to it. About 1,500 acres, I believe.
A country house? How many bedrooms? Well, that point can be cleared up afterwards. You have a townhouse, I hope. A girl with a simple, unspoiled nature like Gwendolen could hardly be expected to reside in the country.
Well, I own a house in Belgrave Square, but it is let by the year to Lady Bloxham. Of course, I can get it back whenever I like at 6 months' notice.
Lady Bloxham? I don't know her.
Oh, she goes about very little. She is a lady considerably advanced in years.
Ah, nowadays that is no guarantee of respectability of character. What number in Belgrave Square?
149.
The unfashionable side. I knew there was something. However, that could easily be altered.
Do you mean the fashion or the side?
Both, if necessary, I presume. What are your politics?
Well, I'm afraid I really have none. I'm a liberal unionist.
Oh, well, they count as Tories. They dine with us, or come in the evening at any rate. Now, to minor matters. Are your parents living?
I have lost both my parents.
To lose one parent, Mr. Worthing, may be regarded as a misfortune. To lose both looks like carelessness. Who was your father? He was evidently a man of some wealth. Was he born in what the radical papers call the purple of commerce? Or did he rise from the ranks of the aristocracy?
I'm afraid I really don't know. The fact is, Lady Bracknell, I had said I'd lost my parents. It would be nearer the truth to say my parents seem to have lost me. I don't actually know who I am by birth. I was found.
Found?
The late Mr. Thomas Cardew, an old gentleman of very charitable and kindly disposition, found me and gave me the name of Worthing, because he happened to have a first-class ticket to Worthing in his pocket at the time. Worthing is a place in Sussex. It is a seaside resort.
Where did this charitable gentleman with a first-class ticket to this seaside resort find you?
In a handbag.
A handbag?
Yes, Lady Bracknell. I was in a handbag. A somewhat large, black leather handbag with handles to it. An ordinary handbag, in fact.
In what locality did this Mr. Thomas Cardew come across this ordinary handbag?
In the cloakroom at Victoria Station. It was given to him in mistake for his own.
The cloakroom? At Victoria Station?
Yes. The Brighton line.
The line is immaterial. Mr. Worthing, I confess I feel somewhat bewildered by what you have just told me. To be born, or at any rate bred, in a handbag, whether it had handles or not, seems to me to display a contempt for the ordinary decencies of family life That reminds one of the worst excesses of the French Revolution. I presume you know what that unfortunate movement led to. As for the particular locality in which the handbag was found, a cloakroom at a railway station may serve to conceal a social indiscretion, has probably indeed been used for that purpose before now, but it could hardly be regarded as an assured basis for a recognized position in good society.
May I ask you then what you would advise me to do? I need hardly say I would do anything in the world to assure Gwendolyn's happiness.
I would strongly advise you, Mr. Worthing, to acquire some relations as soon as possible, and to make a definite effort to produce at any rate one parent of either sex before the season is quite over.
Well, I don't see how I could possibly manage to do that. Yeah, I can show you the handbag at any moment. It's in my dressing room at home. I really think that should satisfy you, Lady Bracknell.
Me, sir? What has it to do with me? You can hardly imagine that I, Lord Bracknell, would dream of allowing our only daughter, a girl brought up with the utmost care, to marry into a cloakroom and form an alliance with a parcel. Good morning, Mr. Worthing.
But...
Good morning, Mr. Worthing.
Curious thing, plain women are always jealous of their husbands. Beautiful women never are.
Beautiful women never have time. They're always so occupied in being jealous of other people's husbands.
I should have thought Lady Caroline would have grown tired of conjugal anxiety by this time. Sir John is her fourth.
So much marriage is certainly not becoming. 20 years of romance make a woman look like a ruin, but 20 years of marriage make her something like a public building.
20 years of romance? Is there such a thing?
Not in our day. Women have become too brilliant. Nothing spoils a romance so much as a sense of humour in the woman.
Or the want of it in a man?
You're quite right. In a temple, everyone should be serious, except the thing that is worshipped.
And that should be man?
Women kneel so gracefully, men don't.
What a thoroughly bad man you must be.
What do you call a bad man?
The sort of man who admires innocence.
And a bad woman?
The sort of woman a man never gets tired of.
You are severe on yourself.
Define us as a sex.
Sphinxes without secrets.
Lord Illingworth, there is one thing I shall always like you for.
Only one thing, and I have so many bad qualities.
Oh, don't be too conceited about them. You may lose them as you grow old.
Never intend to grow old. The soul is born old but grows young. That is the comedy of life.
And the body is born young and grows old. That is life's tragedy.
It's comedy also sometimes. But what is the mysterious reason why you will always like me?
It is that you have never made love to me.
I have never done anything else.
Oh, really? I have not noticed it.
How fortunate. Might have been a tragedy for both of us.
We should each have survived.
Survive everything nowadays except death. Live down anything except a good reputation.
Have you tried a good reputation?
It is one of the many annoyances to which I have never been subjected.
It may come.
Shall we go into tea?
Do you like such simple pleasures?
I adore simple pleasures. They're the last refuge of the complex. But if you wish, let us stay here. Yes, let us stay here. The book of life begins with a man and woman in a garden.
It ends with revelations.
You fence divinely, but the button has come off your foil.
I still have the mask.
It makes your eyes lovelier.
Thank you. Come, we shall go into tea.
Gertrude, I wish you would speak to Tommy Trafford.
What has poor Mr. Trafford done this time? Robert says he is the best secretary he's ever had.
Well, Tommy has proposed to me again. Tommy really does nothing but propose to me. He proposed to me last night in the music room when I was quite unprotected, as there was an elaborate trio going on. I didn't dare make the smallest repartee, I need hardly tell you. If I had, it would have stopped the music at once. Musical people are so absurdly unreasonable. They always want one to be perfectly dumb at the very moment one is longing to be absolutely deaf. Then he proposed to me in broad daylight this morning in front of that dreadful statue of Achilles. Really, the things that go on in front of that work of art are quite appalling. The police should interfere. At luncheon, I saw by the glare in his eye that he was going to propose again, and I just managed to check him in time by assuring him I was a bimetallist. Fortunately, I don't know what bimetallism means, and I don't believe anybody else does either. But the observation crushed Tommy for 10 minutes. He looked quite shocked. And then Tommy is so annoying in the way he proposes. If he proposed at the top of his voice, I should not mind so much. That might produce some effect on the public. But he does it in a horrid, confidential way. When Tommy wants to be romantic, he talks to one just like a doctor. I am very fond of Tommy, but his methods of proposing are quite out of date. I wish, Gertrude, you would speak to him and tell him that once a week is quite often enough to propose to anyone, and that it should always be done in a manner that attracts some attention.
Dear Mabel, don't talk like that. Robert thinks very highly of Mr. Trafford. He believes he has a brilliant future before him.
Oh, I wouldn't marry a man with a future before him for anything under the sun.
Mabel.
I know, dear. You married a man with a future, didn't you? But then Robert was a genius, and you have a noble, self-sacrificing character. I have no character at all, and Robert is the only genius I could ever bear. As a rule, I think they are quite impossible. Geniuses talk so much, don't they? Such a bad habit. And they are always thinking about themselves when I want them to be thinking about me. I must go round now and rehearse at Lady Basildon's. You remember we are having tableau, don't you? The triumph of something. I don't know what. I hope it will be triumph of me. Only triumph I'm really interested in at present.
Dear Margaret, I'm so pleased to see you. No tea, thank you, dear. Just had tea at Lady Markby's. Such bad tea too, it was quite undrinkable. I wasn't at all surprised. Her own son-in-law supplies it. How sweet you look. Where do you get your gowns? And now I must tell you how sorry I am for you, dear Margaret. I really am so sorry for you.
Why, Duchess?
On account of that horrid woman. She dresses so well too, which makes it even worse. It sets such a bad example. Oh, Augustus, you know, my disreputable brother. Oh, such a trial to us. Augustus is completely infatuated about her. It is quite scandalous, for she is absolutely inadmissible into society. Many a woman has a past, but I am told she has at least a dozen, and that they all fit.
Who are you talking about, Duchess?
About Mrs. Erlynne.
Mrs. Erlynne? I've never heard of her. And what has she got to do with me?
Oh, my poor child.
But what is it, Duchess? Why do you talk to me about this person?
Don't you really know? I assure you we're all so distressed about it. Only last night at dear Lady Jansen's, everyone was saying how extraordinary it was that of all men in London, Windermere should behave in such a way.
My husband? But what has he got to do with any woman of that kind?
Ah, what indeed, dear? That is the point. He goes to see her continually. He stops for hours at a time, and while he is there, she is not at home to anyone. Not that many ladies would call on her, my dear, but She has a great many disreputable men friends, my own brother, particularly, as I just told you. Oh, which makes it so awful about Windermere. I mean, we all looked on him as if he was a model husband. But there's absolutely no doubt about it. My dear nieces, you know the Savile girls, don't you? Such nice domestic creatures, plain, dreadfully plain, but so good. Well, they're always at the window doing fancy work and making ugly things for the poor, which I think is very useful of them in these dreadful socialistic days. And this terrible woman has taken a house in Curzon Street, right opposite them. Such a respectable street too. I don't know where we're coming to. And they tell me that Windermere calls 4 or 5 times a week. They see him. They can't help it. And while, of course, they never talk scandal, they will, of course, remark on it to everyone. And the worst of it all is that I am told that this woman has got a great deal of money out of somebody. Thought she came to London 6 months ago without anything at all to speak of. And now she has this charming house in Mayfair. She drives her ponies in the park every afternoon and all, well, since she has known poor dear Windermere.
Oh, I can't believe it.
But it's quite true, my dear. All of London knows it. Which is why I thought it a good idea to come and talk to you and advise you to take Windermere away at once to Homburg or to Aix, where he can find something to amuse him and you can watch him all day long. I assure you, my dear, on many occasions when we were first married, I had to pretend to be very ill and was obliged to drink the most unpleasant mineral waters merely to get Berwick out of town. He was so excessively susceptible. Though I'm bound to say, he did not give away any large sums of money to anybody. He was far too high principled for that.
Duchess, it's impossible. We've only been married 2 years. Our child is but 6 months old.
Ah, the dear pretty baby. How is the little darling? Is it a boy or a girl? I do hope it's a girl. Oh, no, I remember. It's a boy. Oh, I'm so sorry. Boys are so wicked. My boy is extremely immoral. You would not believe at what hours he comes home. And he only left Oxford a few months. I don't know what they teach them there.
Are all men bad?
Ah, all of them, my dear. All of them, without any exception. And they never grow any better. Men become old, but they never become good.
Windermere and I married for love.
Yes, we begin like that. It was only Berwick's brutal and incessant threats of suicide that made me accept him at all. But before the year was out, he was running after all kinds of petticoats, every shape, every colour, every material. And now, my poor child, I must go. We're dining out. Mind you don't take this little aberration of Windermere's too much to heart. Just take him abroad and he'll come back to you all right.
Come back to me?
Yes, dear. These wicked women get our husbands away from us, but they always come back. Slightly damaged, of course. And don't make scenes. Men hate them.
It is very kind of you, Duchess, to come here and tell me all of this. But I simply can't believe that my husband is untrue to me.
Pretty child, I was like that once. But now I know that all men are monsters. The only thing to do is to feed the wretches well. A good cook does wonders, and that I know you have. My dear Margaret, you're not going to cry.
You needn't worry, Duchess. I never cry.
It's quite right, my dear. Crying is the refuge of plain women, but the ruin of pretty ones.
Pray, let me introduce myself to you. My name is Cecily Cardew.
Cecily Cardew. What a very sweet name. Something tells me we are going to be great friends. I like you already more than I can say. My first impressions of people are never wrong.
How very nice of you to like me so much after we have known each other such a comparatively short time. Pray, sit down.
I may call you Cecily, may I not?
With pleasure.
And you will always call me Gwendolen, won't you?
If you wish.
Then that is all quite settled. Is it not?
I hope so.
Perhaps this might be a favourable opportunity for my mentioning who I am. My father is Lord Bracknell. You have never heard of Papa, I suppose?
I don't think so.
Outside the family circle, Papa, I am glad to say, is entirely unknown. I think that is quite as it should be. The home seems to me to be the proper sphere for the man, and certainly once a man begins to neglect his domestic duties, he becomes painfully effeminate, does he not? And I don't like that. It makes men so very attractive. Cecily, Mamma, whose views on education are remarkably strict, has brought me up to be extremely short-sighted. It is part of her system. So, do you mind my looking at you through my glasses?
Not at all, Gwendolen. I am very fond of being looked at.
Lovely. You are here on a short visit, I suppose?
Oh no, I live here.
Really? Your mother, no doubt, or some other female relative of advanced years resides here also.
Oh no, I have no mother nor in fact any relations.
Indeed.
My dear guardian, with the assistance of Miss Prism, has the arduous task of looking after me.
Your guardian?
Yes, I am Mr. Worthing's ward.
No. 'Tis strange, he never mentioned to me that he had a ward. How very secretive of him. He grows more interesting hourly. I am not sure, however, that the news inspires me with feelings of unmixed delight. I am very fond of you, Cecily. I have liked you ever since I met you, but now that I know that you are Mr. Worthing's ward, I cannot help expressing a wish that you were, well, just a little older than you seem to be, and not quite so very alluring in appearance. In fact, if I may speak candidly—
Pray do. I think that whenever one has anything unpleasant to say, one should always be quite candid.
Well, to speak with perfect candour, Cecily, I wish you were fully 42 and more than usually plain for your age. Ernest has a strong, upright nature. He is the very soul of truth and honour. Disloyalty would be as impossible to him as deception. But even men of the noblest possible moral character can be extremely susceptible to the influences, the physical charms of others. Modern, no less ancient history provides us with many most painful examples of what I refer to. If it were not, indeed, history would be quite unreadable.
I beg your pardon, Gwendolen. Did you say Ernest?
Yes.
Oh, but it is not Mr. Ernest Worthing who is my guardian. It is his brother, his elder brother.
Ernest never mentioned to me that he had a brother.
I am sorry to say that they have not been on good terms for a long time.
Oh, well, that accounts for it. And now that I think of it, I have never heard any man mention his brother. The subject seems distasteful to most men. Cecily, you have lifted a load from my mind. I was growing almost anxious. It would have been terrible if any cloud had come across a friendship like ours, would it not? Of course you are quite sure that it is not Mr. Ernest Worthing that is your guardian?
Quite sure. In fact, I am going to be his.
I beg your pardon?
Dearest Gwendolen, there is no reason why I should make a secret of it to you. Our little county newspaper is sure to chronicle the facts next week. Mr. Ernest Worthing and I are engaged to be married.
My darling Cecily, I think there must be some slight error. Mr. Ernest Worthing is engaged to me. The announcement shall appear in the Morning Post by Saturday at the very latest.
I am afraid you must be under some misconception. Ernest proposed to me exactly 10 minutes ago.
It is certainly very curious, for he asked me to be his wife yesterday afternoon at 5:30. If you care to verify the incident, pray do so. I never travel without my diary. One should always have something sensational to read on the train. I am so sorry, dear Cecily, if it is any disappointment to you. But I'm afraid I have the prior claim.
It would distress me more than I can tell you, dear Gwendolen, if it caused you any mental or physical anguish, but I feel bound to point out that since Ernest proposed to you, he clearly has changed his mind.
Poor fellow has been entrapped into any foolish promise. I shall consider it my duty to rescue him at once, and with a firm hand.
Whatever unfortunate entanglement my boy may have got into, I will never reproach him with it after we are married.
Do you allude to me, Miss Cardew, as an entanglement? You are presumptuous. On an occasion such as this, it becomes more than a moral duty to speak one's mind. It becomes a pleasure.
Do you suggest, Miss Fairfax, that I entrapped Ernest into an engagement? How dare you? This is no time for wearing the shallow mask of manners. When I see a spade, I call it a spade.
I am glad to say I have never seen a spade in my life. It is obvious that our social spheres have been widely different.
Some tea, Lady Markby?
No, thanks, dear. The fact is, I promised to go round for 10 minutes to see poor Lady Brancaster, who is in very great trouble. Her own daughter, quite a well-brought-up girl too, has actually become engaged to be married to a curate in Shropshire. It is very sad indeed. I cannot understand this modern mania for curates. In my day, we girls saw them, of course, running about the place like rabbits, but we never took any notice of them, I need hardly say. But I hear that today country society is quite honeycombed with them. I think it most irreligious. And then the eldest son has quarrelled with his father, and it is said then when they meet at the club, Lord Brancaster always hides behind the money article in the Times. However, I am assured that this is a common occurrence nowadays, and that they have to take in extra copies of the Times. In all the clubs in St. James's Street, there are so many sons who won't speak to their fathers, and so many fathers who won't speak to their sons. I think myself it is very much to be regretted.
Oh, so do I. Fathers have much to learn from their sons nowadays.
Really, dear, what?
The art of living, the only really fine art we've produced in modern times.
Ah, well, I'm afraid Lord Brancaster knew a great deal about that. More than his poor wife ever did. You know Lady Brancaster, don't you, dear?
Just slightly. She was staying at Langton last autumn when we were there.
Ah, well, like all stout women, she looks the very picture of happiness, as no doubt you noticed. But there have been many tragedies in her family, besides this affair with the curate. Her own sister, Mrs. Jekyll, led a most unhappy life through no fault of her own, I am sorry to say. She ultimately became so broken-hearted, she went into a convent or on the operatic stage, I forget which. No, it was decorative art and needlework she took up. I know she lost all sense of pleasure in life. And now, Gertrude, if you will permit me, I shall leave Mrs. Cheveley in your charge and call back for her in a quarter of an hour. Or perhaps, dear Mrs. Cheveley, you might wait in the carriage while I'm with Lady Brancaster.
Oh, I hope Mrs. Cheveley will stay here a while. I should like to have a few minutes' conversation with her.
How very kind of you, Lady Chiltern. Believe me, nothing will give me greater pleasure.
Oh, I'm sure the two of you have such pleasant reminiscences of your school days to talk over. Goodbye, dear Gertrude.
Remarkable woman, isn't she, Lady Markby? Talks more and says less than anyone I have ever met.
Mrs. Cheveley, I think it is right to tell you quite frankly that had I known who you really were, I should not have invited you to my house last night.
Really?
I could not have done so.
Then I see that after all these years you haven't changed a bit, Gertrude.
I never change.
Then life has taught you nothing.
It has taught me that a person who has once been guilty of a dishonest and dishonourable action may be guilty of it a second time and should be shunned.
And would you apply that rule to everyone?
Yes, to everyone, without exception.
Then I am sorry for you, Gertrude, very sorry for you.
You see now, I was sure for many reasons any further acquaintance between the two of us during your stay in London is quite impossible.
You know, Gertrude, I don't mind you talking morality a bit. Morality is simply an attitude we adopt towards people whom we personally dislike. You dislike me, I'm quite aware of that, and have always detested you. And yet I have come here to do you a service.
Like the service you wished to render my husband last night, I suppose. Thank heaven I saved him from that.
It was you who made him write that insolent letter to me. It was you who made him break his promise.
Yes.
Then you must make him keep it. I'll give you till tomorrow morning. If by that time your husband does not solemnly bind himself to help me in this great scheme in which I am interested, then
This fraudulent speculation.
Call it what you choose. I hold your husband in the hollow of my hand, and if you are wise, you will do what I tell him to do.
You're impertinent. What has my husband to do with you, with a woman like you?
In this world, like meets like. It is because your husband himself is fraudulent and dishonest that we pair so well together. Between you and he, there are chasms. He and I are closer than friends. We're enemies linked together. The same sin binds us.
How dare you class my husband with yourself? How dare you threaten him or me? Leave my house. You are unfit to enter it.
Your house, a house bought with the price of dishonour. A house in which everything has been paid for by fraud. Ask him what the origin of his fortune is. Get him to tell you how he sold to a stockbroker a cabinet secret. Learn from him to which you owe your position. I will give you both till tomorrow noon. If by that time you do not do what I bid you do, the whole world shall know the origin of Robert Chiltern.
What a comfort it is to have got rid of the men for a little.
Yes, men persecute us dreadfully, don't they?
Persecute as I wish they did.
My dear!
The annoying thing is that the wretches can be perfectly happy without us. That is why I think it is every woman's duty never to leave them alone for a single moment, except during this short breathing space after dinner, without which I believe we poor women would be absolutely worn to shadows.
Worn to shadows, dear?
Yes, Lady Hunsdon. It is such a strain keeping men up to the mark. They are always trying to escape from us.
Well, I suppose the type of husband has completely changed since my young days, but I am bound to state that dear poor Hunsdon was the most delightful of creatures and as good as gold.
My husband is a sort of promissory note. I'm tired of meeting him.
But you renew him from time to time, don't you?
Oh, no, Lady Stutfield. I have only had one husband as yet.
With your views on life, I wonder you married at all.
So do I.
My dear child, I believe you are really happy in your marriage, but that you like to hide your happiness from others.
I assure you I was horribly deceived in Ernest.
I hope not, dear. I knew his mother quite well. She was a Stratton, one of Lord Crowfield's daughters.
Victoria Stratton. I remember her perfectly. A silly fair-haired woman with no chin.
Ernest has a chin. He has a very strong chin, a square chin. Ernest's chin is far too square.
But do you really think a man's chin can be too square? I think a man should look very, very strong, and that his chin should be quite square.
Well, then you should certainly know Ernest, Lady Stutfield. It is only fair to tell you beforehand that he has got no conversation at all.
I adore silent men.
Oh, Ernest isn't silent. He talks the whole time, but he has got no conversation. What he talks about, I don't know. I haven't listened to him for years. He is invariably calm. That is one of the reasons he always gets on my nerves. Nothing is so aggravating as calmness. There is something positively brutal about the good temper of most modern men. I wonder we women stand it as we do.
Yes, men's good temper shows they are not so sensitive as we are, not so finely strung. It makes a great barrier often between husband and wife, does it not? But I would so much like to know what was the wrong thing Mr. Allenby did.
Well, I will tell you, if you solemnly promise to tell everybody else.
Thank you, thank you. I will make a point of repeating it.
When Ernest and I were engaged, he swore to me positively on his knees that he had never loved anyone before in the whole course of his life. I was very young at the time, so I didn't believe him, I needn't tell you. Unfortunately, however, I made no inquiries of any kind until after I had been actually married 4 or 5 months. I found out then that what he'd told me was perfectly true, and that sort of thing makes a man so absolutely uninteresting.
Dear child, you don't mean to tell me that you won't forgive your husband because he never loved anyone else. Did you ever hear such a thing, Lady Stutfield? I am quite surprised.
Oh, women have become so highly educated that nothing surprises us nowadays, except happy marriages. They apparently are getting remarkably rare.
Oh, they're quite out of date.
Except among the middle classes, I have been told.
How like the middle classes.
Yes, is it not? Very, very like them. Do tell me your conception of the ideal husband. I think it would be so very, very helpful.
Ideal husband? There couldn't be such a thing. The institution is wrong.
The ideal man, then, in his relationship with us.
The ideal man? Oh, the ideal man should talk to us as if we were goddesses and treat us as if we were children. He should refuse all our serious requests and gratify every one of our whims. He should encourage us to have caprices and forbid us to have missions. He should always say much more than he means and always mean much more than he says.
But how could he do both, dear?
He should never run down other pretty women. That would show that he had no taste, or make one suspect that he had too much. No, he should be nice about them all, but say that somehow they don't attract him.
Yes, that's always very, very pleasant to hear about other women.
If we ask him a question about anything, he should give us an answer all about ourselves. He should invariably praise us for whatever qualities he knows we haven't got. But he should be pitiless, quite pitiless, in reproaching us for the virtues that we have never dreamed of possessing. He should never believe we know the use of useful things. That would be unforgivable. But he should shower on us everything we don't want.
As far as I can see, he is to do nothing but pay bills and compliments.
He should persistently compromise us in public, but treat us with absolute respect when we are alone. And yet he should always be ready to have a perfectly terrible scene whenever we want one, and to become miserable, absolutely miserable at a moment's notice, and to overwhelm us with just reproaches in less than 20 minutes, and to be positively violent at the end of half an hour. and to leave us forever at 7:45 when we have to go and dress for dinner. And when after that one has seen him for really the last time, and he has refused to take back all the little things he has given one, and promised never to communicate with one again or to write one any foolish letters, he should be perfectly broken-hearted and telegraph to one all day long and send one little notes every half an hour by a private hansom and dine quite alone at the club so that everyone should know how unhappy he was. And after a whole dreadful week, during which one has gone about everywhere with one's husband just to show how absolutely lonely he was, he may be given a third last parting in the evening, and then, if his conduct has been quite irreproachable and one has behaved really badly to him, he should be allowed to admit that he has been entirely in the wrong. And when he has admitted that, it becomes a woman's duty to forgive, and one can do it all over again from the beginning with variations.
Good evening, Lord Goring.
Mrs. Cheveley, great heavens! May I ask what you were doing in my drawing room?
Oh, merely listening. I have a perfect passion for listening through keyholes. One always hears such wonderful things through them.
Doesn't that sound rather like tempting Providence?
Oh, surely Providence can resist temptation by this time.
I'm glad you have called. I'm going to give you some good advice.
Oh, pray don't. One should never give a woman anything she cannot wear in the evening.
You're quite as willful as you used to be.
Far more. I am greatly improved. I have had more experience.
Too much experience is a dangerous thing. Pray, have a cigarette. Half the pretty women in London smoke cigarettes. Personally, I prefer the other half.
Thanks, I never smoke. My dressmaker wouldn't like it. And a woman's first duty in life is to her dressmaker, isn't it? What the second duty is, no one has as yet discovered.
You have come here to sell me Robert Chiltern's letter, haven't you?
To offer it to you under conditions. How did you guess?
Because you haven't mentioned the subject. Have you got it with you?
A well-made dress has no pockets.
What is your price for it?
Oh, how absurdly English you are. The English think that a chequebook can solve every problem in life. Oh, my dear Arthur, I have rather more money than you have, and more than Robert Chiltern is likely to get hold of. Money is not what I want.
What do you want then, Mrs. Cheveley?
Why don't you call me Laura?
I don't like the name.
You used to adore it.
Yes, that's why.
Arthur, you loved me once.
Yes.
And you asked me to be your wife.
That was the natural result of my loving you.
And you threw me over because you saw, or said you saw, poor old Lord Mortlake trying to have a violent flirtation with me in the conservatory at Tenby.
I'm under the impression my lawyer settled that matter with you on certain terms, dictated by yourself.
Oh, in those days I was poor. You were rich.
Quite so. That is why you pretended to love me.
Poor old Lord Mortlake, who only had two topics of conversation, his gout and his wife. I never could quite work out which of the two he was talking about. He used the most horrible language about them both. Well, Arthur, you were silly. Lord Mortlake was never anything more to me than an amusement. One of those utterly tedious amusements one only finds at an English country house on an English country Sunday. I don't think anyone can be held at all morally responsible for what he or she does at an English country house.
Yes, I know lots of people think that.
I loved you, Arthur.
My dear Mrs. Cheveley, you have always been far too clever to know anything about love.
I did love you, and you loved me. You know you loved me. Love is a very wonderful thing. I suppose that when a man has once loved a woman, he will do anything for her, except perhaps continue to love her. I want to come back to England. I'm tired of living abroad. I want to have a charming house here. I want to have a salon. If one could only teach the English how to talk and the Irish how to listen, society here would be quite civilised. Besides, I have arrived at the romantic stage. When I saw you at the Chilterns last night, I knew you were the only man I had ever cared for, if I have ever cared for anybody, Arthur. And so, on the morning of the day that you marry me, I will give you Robert Chiltern's letter. That is my offer. I will give it to you now, if you promise to marry me.
Now?
Tomorrow.
Are you really serious?
Yes, quite serious.
I should make you a very bad husband.
Oh, I don't mind bad husbands. I've had two. They amused me immensely.
Oh, you mean that you amused yourself immensely, don't you?
So you mean you are going to allow your greatest friend, Robert Chiltern, to be ruined, rather than marry someone who really has quite considerable attractions left? I thought you would have risen to some height of great sacrifice, Arthur. I think you should. And the rest of your life you can spend in contemplating your imperfections.
Oh, I do that as it is. And as for self-sacrifice, it should be put down by law. It is so demoralising to the people for whom one sacrifices oneself. They always go to the bad.
As if anything could demoralise Robert Chiltern. You seem to forget I know his true character.
What you know is not his true character. It was an act of folly done in his youth. Dishonourable, I admit. Shameful, I admit. Unworthy of him, I admit, and therefore not his true character.
Or how you men stand up for each other.
How you women war against each other.
I only war against one woman. Against Gertrude Chiltern. I hate her. I hate her now more than ever.
Because you've brought a real tragedy into her life, I suppose.
Oh, the only real tragedy in a woman's life is the fact that the past is always her lover and the future invariably her husband.
Lady Chiltern knows nothing of the kind of life to which you are alluding.
A woman who wears size 7 3/4 gloves never knows much about anything at all. Did you know that Gertrude has always worn size 7 3/4? It's one of the reasons there was never any moral sympathy between us. Well, Arthur, I suppose we can consider this romantic interview at an end. You admit it was romantic, don't you? For the privilege of being your wife, I was willing to sacrifice a great prize, the climax of my diplomatic career. You decline. Very well. I will expose Sir Robert.
You mustn't do that. It would be vile, horrible, infamous.
Oh, don't use big words. They mean so little. It's a commercial transaction, that is all. No use bringing sentimentality into it. I offer to sell Robert Chiltern a certain thing. If he cannot pay me my price, he will have to pay the world a greater price. There's nothing more to be said. I must go. Goodbye.
So that's our son, Rachel. Well, I am very proud of him. He's a Harford, every inch of him. By the way, why Arbuthnot, Rachel?
One name is as good as another when one has no right to any.
Oh, I suppose so. But why Gerald?
After a man whose heart I broke. After my father.
Well, Rachel, what's over is over. All I can say now is that I am very, very much pleased with our boy. The world will know him merely as my private secretary, but to me he will be something very near and very dear. It's a curious thing, Rachel. My life had seemed to be quite complete, but it was not so. It lacked something. It lacked a son, and I found my son now, and I'm glad I found him.
You have no right to claim him, or the smallest part of him. The boy is entirely mine and shall remain mine.
My dear Rachel, you've had him to yourself for over 20 years. Why not let me have him for a little now? He's quite as much mine as he is yours.
You talking of the child who you abandoned? Of the child who, as far as you are concerned, might have died of hunger and of want?
You forget, Rachel. It was you who left me, not I who left you.
I left you because you refused to give the child a name. Before my son was born, I implored you to marry me.
Oh, I had no expectations then. Besides, Rachel, I wasn't much older than you were. I was only 22, 21, I believe, when the whole thing began in your father's garden.
When a man is old enough to do wrong, he should be old enough to do right also.
My dear Rachel, intellectual generalities are always interesting. But generalities and morals mean absolutely nothing. And as for saying that I left our son to starve, well, that is, of course, untrue and silly. My mother offered you 600 a year, but you wouldn't take anything. You simply disappeared and carried the child away with you.
I wouldn't have accepted a penny from her. Your father was different. He told you in my presence when we were in Paris that it was your duty to marry me.
Duty is what one expects from others, not one does for oneself. Of course, I was influenced by my mother. Every man is when he's young.
Well, I am glad to hear you say so. Gerald shall certainly not go away with you.
Nonsense, Rachel.
Oh, Do you think I would allow my son?
Our son.
My son. To go away with the man who spoiled my youth, who ruined my life, who has tainted every moment of my day. You don't realise what my past has been in suffering and in shame.
My dear Rachel, I must candidly say that I think Gerald's future is considerably more important than your past.
Gerald cannot separate his future from my past.
Well, that is exactly what he should do. And it is exactly what you should help him do. What a typical woman you are. You talk sentimentally, and yet you are thoroughly selfish the whole time. But then let's have a scene. What is our son at present? An underpaid clerk at a small provincial bank in a third-rate English town. If you imagine he's quite happy in such a position, then you are mistaken. He is thoroughly discontented.
He was not discontented until he met you. You have made him so.
Well, of course I made him so. Discontent is the first step in the progress of a man or a nation. But I didn't leave him with a mere longing for things he couldn't get. No, I made him a charming offer. He jumped at it, and he'd hardly say any young man would. And now, simply because it turns out that I am the boy's own father and he my own son, you're proposing to practically ruin his career. In other words, if I were a perfect stranger, you would allow Gerald to go away with me. But as he's my own flesh and blood, you won't. Utterly illogical you are.
I will not allow him to go.
Well, how can you prevent it? What excuse will you give to him for making him decline this offer of mine? I won't mention in what standing I am to him, I need hardly say. But you daren't. You know that. Look how you brought him up.
I have brought him up to be a good man.
Quite so. And what is the result? You have educated him to be your judge if he ever finds you out. And a bitter and unjust judge he will be to you. Don't be deceived, Rachel. Children begin by loving their parents. In time, they judge them. Rarely, if ever, do they forgive them.
George, don't take my son away from me. I have had 20 years of sorrow. And I've only had one thing to love me. Only one thing to love. You have lived a life of joy, of pleasure, of success. You've been quite happy. You've never thought of us. There was no reason, according to your views of life, why you should have remembered us at all. Your meeting us was a mere accident. A horrible accident. Forget it. Don't come now and rob me of all that I have in the whole world. You are so rich in other things. Leave me the little vineyard of my life. Leave me the walled-in garden and the well of water. The ewe lamb that God sent me in pity or in wrath. Oh, leave me that. George, don't take Gerald from me.
Rachel, at the present moment, you're not necessary to Gerald's career. I am. There's nothing more to be said on the subject.
I will not let him go.
Well, here is Gerald. He has the right to decide for himself.
Prism? Come here, Prism. Prism, where is that baby? 28 years ago, Prism, you left Lord Bracknell's house, number 104, Upper Grosvenor Street, in charge of a perambulator containing a baby of the male sex. You never returned. A few weeks later, through the elaborate investigations of the Metropolitan Police, the perambulator was discovered at midnight, standing by itself in a remote corner of Bayswater. It contained a manuscript of a 3-volume novel of more than usually revolting sentimentality. But the baby was not there. Prism! Where is that baby?
Lady Bracknell, I admit with shame that I do not know. I only wish I did. The plain facts of the case are these. On the morning of the day you mention, a day that will be forever branded on my memory, I prepared as usual to take the baby out in its perambulator. I had with me an old but somewhat capacious handbag in which I intended to place the manuscript of a work of fiction that I had written during my few unoccupied hours. In a moment of mental abstraction for which I can never forgive myself, I deposited the manuscript in the bassinet and placed the baby in the handbag.
But where did you deposit the handbag?
Do not ask me, Mr. Worthing.
Miss Prism, this is a matter of no small importance to me. I insist on knowing where you deposited that handbag that contained that infant.
I left it in the cloakroom of one of the larger railway stations in London.
What railway station?
Victoria. The Brighton line.
Is this the handbag, Miss Prism? Examine it carefully before you speak. The happiness of more than one life depends on your answer.
It seems to be mine. Here is the injury it received through the upsetting of a Gower Street omnibus in younger, happier days. And here is the stain on the lining caused by the explosion of a temperance beverage, an incident in Leamington. And here on the lock are my initials. I had forgotten that I had had them placed there in an extravagant mood. Oh, the bag is most definitely mine. I am delighted to have it returned so unexpectedly. It has been a great inconvenience being without it all these years.
Miss Prism, more is restored to you than just this handbag. I was the baby you placed in it.
You?
Yes. Mother!
Mr. Worthing, I am unmarried.
Unmarried? Well, I do not deny that is a serious blow. But, well, after all, who has the right to cast a stone against one who has suffered? Cannot repentance wipe out an act of folly? Why must there be one law for men and another for women? Mother, I forgive you.
Mr. Worthing, there is some error. There is the lady who can tell you who you really are.
Lady Bracknell, I hate to seem inquisitive, but would you kindly inform me who I am?
I am afraid the news I have to give you will not altogether please you. You are the son of my poor sister, Mrs. Moncrief, and consequently Algernon's elder brother.
Algy's elder brother? Then I have a brother after all. I knew I had a brother. I always said I had a brother. But, well, Aunt Augusta, a moment. When Miss Prism had left me in the handbag, had I been christened already?
Every luxury that money could buy, including christening, had been lavished on you by your fond and doting parents.
Well, then I was christened after all. Well, that is settled. Now, what name was I given? Let me know the worst.
As the eldest son, you were naturally christened after your father.
Yes, but what was my father's Christian name?
I cannot at the present moment recall the general's name, but I have no doubt he had one. He was eccentric, but only in later years. That was a result of the Indian climate and marriage and indigestion and other things of that kind.
Well, his name would appear in the army lists of the period, I suppose, Aunt Augusta.
The general was essentially a man of peace, except in his domestic life, but I have no doubt his name would appear in any military directory.
Well, the army lists of the last 40 years are here. Oh, these delightful records have been my constant study. Generals, Malham, Maxbone, Magley, what ghastly names they have. Mark B. Mixley, Mobbs, Moncrief, Lieutenant 1840, Captain, Lieutenant Colonel, Colonel, General 1869, Christian names. Ernest John. Well, I've always said I've been in earnest, haven't I? Well, it's earnest after all. I mean, it naturally is earnest.
Yes, I remember now. The general's name was Ernest. I knew I had a particular reason for disliking the name.
Lady Bracknell, it is a terrible thing for a man to find out so suddenly that all his life he's been speaking nothing but the truth. Can you forgive me? I am, you understand, quite certain I can change.
My nephew, you seem to be displaying signs of triviality.
On the contrary, Aunt Augusta, I've now realised for the first time in my life the vital importance of being earnest.
Good morning, Miss Mabel. Miss Mabel, good morning. I said good morning, Miss Mabel.
Oh, are you here? Of course you understand that after you're breaking your appointment, I am never going to speak to you again.
Oh, please don't say such a thing. You are the one person in London I really like to have to listen to me.
Lord Goring, I never believe a single word either you or I say to each other, and people who don't keep their appointments in the park are horrid.
Detestable.
I'm glad you admit it, but I wish you wouldn't look so pleased about it.
I can't help it. I always look pleased when I'm with you.
Well, then I suppose it is my duty to remain with you?
Of course it is.
Well, my duty is a thing I never do, on principle. It always depresses me, so I am afraid I must leave you.
Please don't, Miss Mabel. I have something very particular to say to you.
Oh, is it a proposal?
Well, yes, it is. I'm bound to say it is.
I am so glad. That makes the second today.
The second today? What conceited ass has been impertinent enough to dare to propose to you before I had proposed to you?
Tommy Trafford, of course. It is one of Tommy's days for proposing. He always proposes on Tuesdays and Thursdays during the season.
You didn't accept him, I hope.
I make it a rule never to accept Tommy. That is why he goes on proposing. Of course, as you didn't turn up this morning, I very nearly said yes. It would have been an excellent lesson both for him and for you if I had. It would have taught you both better manners.
Oh, bother Tommy Trafford. Tommy is a silly little ass. I love you.
I know. And I think you might have mentioned it before. I am sure I have given you heaps of opportunities.
Mabel, do be serious. Please, be serious.
Ah, that is the sort of thing a man always says to a girl before he has been married to her. He never says it afterwards.
Mabel, I've told you that I love you. Can't you love me a little in return?
You silly Arthur. If you knew anything about anything, which you don't, you would know that I adore you. Everyone in London knows it except for you. It is a public scandal the way I adore you. I have been going about the last 6 months telling the whole of society that I adore you. I wonder you consent to have anything to say to me. I have no character left at all. At least I feel so happy that I am quite sure I have no character left at all.
Dear, do you know I was awfully afraid of being refused.
But you never have been refused yet by anybody, have you, Arthur? I can't imagine anyone refusing you.
Of course, I'm not nearly good enough for you, Mabel.
I am so glad, darling. I was afraid you were.
And I'm a little over 30.
Dear, you look weeks younger than that.
How sweet of you to say so. And I must confess, I'm fearfully extravagant.
But so am I, Arthur. So we're sure to agree. And now I must go and see Gertrude.
Must you really?
Yes.
Oh, then do tell her I want to talk to her particularly. I've been waiting here all the morning to see either her or Robert.
Do you mean to say you didn't come here expressly to propose to me?
No, that was a touch of genius.
Your first.
My last.
I am delighted to hear it. Now, don't stir. I'll be back in 5 minutes. And don't fall into any temptations while I'm away.
Dear Mabel, while you're away, there are none. It makes me horribly dependent on you.